How do you know you are who you think you are? A classic philosophical question, and the basis of Ghost in a Shell, a film which tackles a no longer distant future in which cybernetic enhancements are commonplace. When it's possible to continuously augment one's body and mind, increasing one's capabilities and access to information, there's no practical reason to decline the offer. However, an unexpected and often unobserved cost is associated with age enhancement. When your body and mind become so easily replaceable, how can you be so sure that you remain yourself? The film opens with a shot of the main character, Kusanagi, looking out over the city, ruminating over all of these things while she waits for a chance to engage on her mission. The cityscape is not as dystopian or futuristic as many other attempts to portray the then far future. While the typical skyscrapers dominate, it's a far less bright and more grounded portrayal. Large foot traffic marketplaces are still popular. Vehicles are your standard cars and trucks. Armed forces still rely on generic rifles. There's a distinct lack of blatant futuristic feel in the environment. Instead, all of the advancements made during this time lie within. This is corroborated by the soundtrack. Ghost in the Shell doesn't feature much of a soundtrack, but there is one single standout piece. The title sequence track, Chant 1, Making of a Cyborg, is the absolute opposite of what you would expect from a futuristic cyberpunk story. It's this primal, choir-dominated song that sets the tone perfectly. It telegraphs that this is not necessarily a story about a technological dystopian future. Rather, this is a story about the self, a return from advancement, forcing you to grapple with the fundamental nature of your existence. Ghost in a Shell is very obviously inspired by Blade Runner, another hallmark of science fiction that tackles extremely similar subject matter. However, while Blade Runner somewhat beats around the bush and leaves it up to the viewer to put the pieces together on their own terms, Ghost in a Shell isn't afraid to ask the questions directly. Kusanagi doesn't speak much throughout the film, but when she does, it nearly always has to deal with who she and everyone else really is. In one of the opening scenes, as she debriefs the driving plot of the movie to her partner, Tosuga, she delivers a monologue which would be enough to carry the entire philosophical weight of the movie on its own.
前から聞いてみたかったんだけど、なんで俺みたいな男を本庁から引き抜いたんです？
お前がそういう男だからさ。
え？
不正規活動の経験のないデカ上がりでおまけに初対持ち。電脳化はしてても脳みそはたっぷり残ってるし、ほとんど生身。戦闘単位としてどんなに優秀でも、同じ企画品で構成されたシステムはどこかに致命的な欠陥を持つことになるわ。組織も人も特殊化の果てにあるのは緩やかなし。それだけ。
Almost all of Kusanagi's dialogue deals with these topics, the balancing act between being able to classify yourself as a human being and technological augmentation. As the film progresses, we observe the weaknesses that she's talking about firsthand. False memories are so easily implanted into cyborgs. The brain augmentations which allow for such capacity for information via the net also transform it into a computer. Old data can be so easily overridden that it's impossible for the host to tell if they're living a lie. When it's so easy to discard the pieces of yourself, your body becomes a mere shell for data to pass through. It becomes impossible to tell where the self resides. In some sense, what we call ourselves is merely a collection of memories, data which form a coherent context in which personality resides. You are constructed through both lived data, memories, and pre-existing data, DNA, and the amalgamation results in the unique you. From this definition, it makes sense to ask the following question. What happens if you lose your memories? What happens if you lose your DNA? And if you're made aware of this, can you really call you yourself? Perhaps even more interesting to ask is if every person is comprised of the same data set, is there still a difference between you and someone else? On the surface level, there's no downside to augmentation. You would be denying yourself nigh immortality, physical and mental prowess otherwise impossible. However, each augment comes with a tax on yourself. It's impossible to realize. It's as easy as overwriting a line in a document, but how can you be so sure that you will remain yourself after the fact? This is the trap of cybernetic enhancement. While it's stated to be possible to revert, what would happen to yourself afterwards? Kusanagi and her cohort might be the good guys, but how can you be so sure that this isn't a product of internal manipulation by the government which employs them? This is why Tosuga is so important to Kusanagi. He's unmistakably human. Ghost in a Shell builds towards this final conflict gradually, introducing doubt within through the cases, and with each resulting dialogue about the self being rich in insight. The primary antagonist isn't really a hacker. It's the cost of mass amalgamation through the net. The accumulation of information is rich in benefits, but is it worth the price of yourself? Could you even consider yourself alive if you're unable to die now that you've integrated with the net? Kusanagi's hobby of diving into the sea, carrying the risk of certain death should her floaters fail, is her last bastion of humanity. Knowing that every time she comes to the surface, she is alive, having experienced the entire spectrum of existence through the abyss of the water, is what tethers her to this world. The depths are a true point of no return, and yet for those who have effectively achieved immortality, it is an essential leap to make in order to guarantee your existence. Kusanagi and the Puppet Master are parallel in this sense, both understanding that life cannot accurately be defined without death, and choose to embrace it despite their status. Ghost in the Shell isn't one to provide you with answers. It asks you questions, defines variables, and states arguments, but it doesn't reach a definitive conclusion. How could it? The movie itself admits that humanity still does not understand how to define life. And that's the real danger of it all. The development of technology is vastly outpacing our own understanding of the fundamental natural systems we're basing it on. Augmentation is so alluring because we do not understand the value of what you must give up in order to acquire it. It's only once you reach the point of no return that you truly understand what you've done, and then you cease to exist.